I'm pleased to introduce the facilitator for our first session, my friend and colleague and the Director of Education for Pioneer Network, Joan Devine.
Well, thank you, Penny. I am so pleased to be a part of today's opening session as we envision the future, looking for meaning and purpose. We all know that in the past 18 months, it has just been devastating for us in so many ways, not the least of which relates to the social isolation that's been a part of all of our lives because of COVID. But there have been some valuable lessons that we can learn from what we've all experienced. Through the years, as I've worked with organizations to support a person-centered culture, like so many others, I often start training with lessons designed to open people's hearts to the problem of institutional care, a great way to create aha moments that are often a catalyst for change. Well, COVID has provided many aha moments. And I believe one of the big ones has come from the personal experience most of us have had related to seclusion and social isolation, how it made us feel personally, the losses we experienced when we had to give up being with others and doing the things that bring meaning to our lives. From this, there is a new understanding of how devastating isolation can be for those living in residential care settings or even in their own homes. Or as Eden teaches us, just how detrimental to our health and well-being loneliness, helplessness, and boredom can be. And so in this session, we would like to start our session by hearing from three very special residents. They'll share with us their experiences living in residential care both before and during the pandemic, and from their experiences, their visions of what meaning and purpose can look like. So let me introduce you to our first speaker, Sandra Foltz. Sandra is a retired teacher who lives at Asbury Spring Hill in the personal care unit. If you read Sandra's bio, you saw hers has been a very active life, teaching, volunteering, raising a family, and that she's remained active in her community. And so, Sandy, we would love to hear your perspective of what it means to find meaning and purpose, what we as providers need to hear from you about life before, during, and after COVID. And I do have to share with you, Sandra, unfortunately, is the victim of our first technical issue of the day. Her camera is not working. So I hope, take a look at Sandra's picture. She is the third person from the right. And you'll see her beautiful face, her beautiful smile, both in her mouth and her eyes. That's what you'd be seeing and you'd be hearing as Sandra talks. So just put that picture in your head. And Sandra, you're on. We'd love to hear a little bit of your story.
Well, before COVID came, of course, we were very active and we could have friends come. I had people come at least once a month to play cards, and we would have snacks and enjoy each other's company. But then when COVID came, and we haven't been able to do it since. So that is, for those of us who like to play cards and like to visit, it's difficult. The good news is we have a telephone and we can kind of chat with each other and keep in touch that way. We have a social director who is very involved here. And now we've got an assistant social director. So we do have activities on the weekends, which we did not have for a while. There are all kinds of, each day we have a list of things that we can do. For instance, today is bingo day. And so at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we play bingo. And then tomorrow there is going to be a piano player come and entertain us. And he plays by ear, plays anything you want, and is just wonderful. We always look forward to his visits. And of course, that's another thing that was canceled. We have a dog that comes and visits about once a week. Her name is Molly. And her trainer is Bob, and he brings her around. And then we have other residents here who walk their dogs and come and visit with us as we are sitting outside. One is a 17-year-old dog, and she's full of energy. So, and then there are other people walking dogs. So we have that to look forward to. And then there's one lady that has a cat in one of the little strollers that she brings around. So we do have entertainment like that. We are fortunate here where we live. We have an area right outside where we can sit and visit. And there's also a patio. If we have company, we can sit over there if we want. There are tables. You could have company for lunch outside if you wish. But we have an area that is very conducive to visiting. And it's shaded or sunny, whichever you prefer. And we can just go right out the door and we are there. And when we are out there, we don't need to use our masks if we are far enough apart. But anywhere in the building, we have to use a mask, which sometimes is hard to understand people because of the hearing and so on, and things get muffled. But other than that, we do pretty well. We're having, we have a town hall meeting once every month where our CEO kind of lets us know that what's going on. We are now having a new boxy court, however you pronounce it. I've never played it, so I don't know. And also fire pit, where you can go sit around an area like that. And also 2 putting greens that are being put in for residents or any company you have. So, and they're talking about maybe even putting in horseshoes eventually. So they are getting things for visitors as well as residents. So we are fortunate that they are looking ahead and planning ahead. Other than that, things are just about what everybody else has. We still are having to wear masks, and we have to be careful of who we are visiting with and make sure that hopefully they are vaccinated. So, and they limit visiting, amount of people coming is better when we're outside. When we're inside, they ask us just to have 2 people, but outside we can have like 4 or whatever. And I just have company with less. So
well,
that's what's going on here.
There you go. And it sounds, Sandy, like you have adjusted well to all these challenges. But as I listen to you, I hear in your message those things that are continuing to add meaning and purpose, obviously before COVID, during COVID sometimes. And, as we come hopefully to the other side of this journey, spaces outdoors. We'll have to check back with you and see if you do learn how to play bocce ball.
Right.
But having pets, having your friends able to visit, being engaged with leadership in the organization certainly is meaningful. And one of the things that you shared that I think sometimes we forget as we envision the future and are looking for new and different is sometimes it sounds to me as I listen to you that there is comfort in some of the routine, in the bingo game, in those things that have been a part of your life at the community and continue to be a part of your life. It continues to add comfort, even as it may be kind of the same thing that you've done. It is a comfortable thing to do, and it's something that you value.
Very well. Yes.
Well, thank you, Sandy. And we'll get back to you. So hang tight. But right now we're going to move on, and I'm going to introduce to you another new friend of mine, Wynn Bernard. Wynn is a resident of Scandinavian Living Center in the greater Boston area. So welcome, Wynn, and we'd love to hear a little of your story.
Thank you very much, and welcome to everybody who's attending the symposium, one way or another. I live about 7 or 8 miles from Boston in an assisted living facility, which is called the Scandinavian Living Center. And the key word is center. We are community oriented and have much of the community coming in to use our facility to visit or for other reasons. Obviously, when COVID came along and we had no visitors and no outside community groups using our facility, it was very, very lonely. That was when I realized how important it was not to be isolated or just part of, well, almost a segregated group of seniors and no one else. It's so important, I think, to mix generations by having them come in and use the facility. In this past week, we had a blood drive from the Red Cross, and we had voting. We used it for the polls. So this is a way that we use our facility, any way that it can bring the community in. And I have a short video, if this is a time, Joan.
This is a perfect time.
Yep, okay. This is the
At the-
entrance. Oh, excuse me, go ahead.
At the Scandinavian Living Center and Cultural Center in Newton, outdoor spaces are beautifully maintained. Inside, large picture windows overlook a central courtyard. Residents love it.
The light that pours in, the size.
Particularly the size.
Yes,
That it's a
particularly
small
the size.
facility and it doesn't feel like an institution.
Not at all. She's 17, so she's a senior too.
Wynn Barnard and Alice Dirquist are good friends. They live in 2 of 40 apartments in this assisted living center based on Scandinavian principles. Joe Corella has been on a mission to transform elder care since he was 17.
I tore my ACL, and by accident, I was told at the hospital, pediatric ward is closed. We're going to put you in the geriatric ward. 4 days, 4 nights, I was transformed. It was the worst experience I've ever had.
After getting an MBA at Babson, he got to work in the 90s, traveling to Scandinavia to figure out what they were doing right.
I saw professors and professionals, administrators, residents. I stayed in a service home, which is our assisted living.
He saw autonomy, a residential model, not institutional, and yes, lots of light, which meant less apartments, less income.
When people would say to me years ago, "You're crazy for building 50% common space," my building committee, made up of Scandinavians, would say to me, "No, that's normal. Just let's keep going."
Above all, though, Corella says he saw a commitment to bringing the larger community in.
Isolation, once you have it, is institutional living, thinking. There's no wellness there. We have over 40 organizations that use this as a headquarters, a gathering place.
People from all over Newton come here all the time.
Newton Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller says the city is using this place as a model as they design a new senior center.
It's just a special place where we cross the boundaries and the borders of age.
The Scandinavian Cultural Center, which shares the building, is a big draw, hosting regular events from art exhibits to musical performances. Residents attend for free. Everyone else is a paying customer.
We get the broadest audience from our food festival, which happens every September, and we have over 500 people that visit the front lawn and taste Scandinavian treats and enjoy music. But we've had people from as far as Washington State, down Florida.
It's a passing parade.
It is. It's like a hotel lobby all the time.
And you're not looking at the same thing all the time.
Same old faces.
And you have lots of choices.
And the opportunity for new experiences at any age. Alice feels so good, she's gone back to work.
Good afternoon, Scandinavian Living Center. How
She's
may
the part-time receptionist and says she couldn't ask for a better commute.
Thank you for showing it. That gives a very good picture of who we are. And we'll be welcoming the community back again, we hope, little by little, until we're back where we were. So thank you for letting me speak.
Well, Wynn, it was wonderful. I always love hearing the story. And I love that it's personal for you. It sounds like you've actually, your vision for the future, you found
I did.
several years ago.
Yes, I did. Really. I believe with all my heart, this is the future.
You know,
Type of
we talk
living
about,
facility.
there you go. We talk about aging and community, and that's what it's all about. And just as an FYI, you saw Joe, who is,
I did.
and you'll all get to meet Joe a little bit later on because he's in one of our other sessions. But in the meantime, when your story was wonderful and we loved hearing it, and you'll be back in just a little bit. Now, some of you may recognize the third resident on our panel, Verna Cavey. She's a resident in independent living at Christian Living Communities outside of Denver. And Verna has been a friend of Pioneer Network for several years now, sharing her thoughts, her wisdom, and advocacy with us through our newsletters and other forums. I never know what Verna is going to share, but I always know it will be something I need to listen to. So welcome, Verna.
Thank you, Joan. Hey, everybody. Good morning. It is chilly in Denver this morning. I've got a sweatshirt on. My relationship with purpose and meaning, I retired over 10 years ago, started in a provider-directed community, and that was pretty much the norm back then. I was told when to eat dinner, where to sit, who to sit with. That lasted a while, and then I became very depressed. And I should acknowledge, though, that even in a rigid, and I use the term purposefully, facility, because it was rigid, that there were staff members who worked really hard to give us hope and opportunity. And I salute them. There are people out there working in communities that, you know, are pretty rigid and traditional, and they're really doing their best to progress, to move it forward. So I salute them. So my doctor and I just said, no, this is not working. And I went in search, and with the help of my friends, found Claremont, which at the time was directed by Jill Vitale also, and her amazing team. And so I went from a very provider directed to not just person centered, but resident directed. They had established their own college, and oh my gosh, it was just amazing. And it was a transformation for me personally. I mean, I was flying 2 feet off the ground all of the time. I had purpose and meaning out the kazoo. It was just truly wonderful. And so you can see that progression as we move along, where purpose and meaning becomes more and more powerful in your life. And now we're moving in a more community sense. We're looking at a new stage of citizenship where residents are really thinking in terms of both their inner community and the external world, and their exchange, their interactions with that. And that's just opening up a whole spectrum. So my colleague and I, Mariah Bernhardt, are working with, we've been talking to people, to you folks in various states and across the country, talking about these ideas. And there is a little slide that we can see, which is that continuum. And you can see on the left, starting with the provider directed. I should say Mariah's not joining me today because she's getting married, so we'll have to excuse her for that. But anyway, so here provider directed, where obviously management is making the decisions. And then those wonderful staff who still are working hard in that environment to move it forward. And person-centered and person or resident directed. And now, because of the discussions we've been having with people, and there is an article, by the way, saying, can we talk, on the Pioneer Network site. And there's an amazing discussion going on there. So I encourage you to take a look at it. But while we were just talking to people, the citizenship model or the community model has come forward. And so we're just moving forward. Purpose and meaning is just escalating. Granted, I acknowledge that COVID has set us back a little bit. And we're having to, come back to return. When you're locked up and you can't program, you can't make decisions, then it is very difficult to be a resident directed. However, with technology, a lot of people were able to continue their activities, and so on and so forth. But I encourage you to get into this discussion and think about where we're going, because I have to be honest, this is the best part of my life. I am so happy. I feel so fulfilled. I feel like I'm contributing. I mean, it's the best. So I feel very fortunate that I'm living in 2021, and with good people like you who are working so very hard. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Verna. As I said, I always know you're going to share something very special with us. And once again, you did. And the work that you're doing, the advocacy, the purpose that it's brought to your life, but it has given so much meaning to the rest of us as well, having that. So as always, beautiful message. And we will post, actually, I think Penny posted in the chat a link to the blog on our website. So
great.
As Verna said, take a look at it. It's a great conversation, become a part of it. So now, we've listened to Sandra and Wynn and Verna, and we recognize how important it is that we hear their voices, that we hear the voice of all residents living in senior living communities. They need to be heard as we look to the future, because it is their future and what wisdom they provide as we shape the future for all of us. It won't be enough in the future to just pull out that activity calendar, to dust it off and go back to life as usual. We have to learn from what we have experienced. We need to rethink what engagement is, what creates meaning and purpose, how we support not only health, but well-being for each individual living in our communities, and quite frankly, for each individual working within our communities. And so I'm really pleased to introduce to you our final panelist, Scott Smith. Scott is the National Director of Resident Programming for 5-Star Senior Living, and he's going to share with us how to go from vision to reality as we are reimagining engagement and traditional activity programs. So welcome, Scott.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here speaking with all of you. And I too am in Colorado, which is why I'm wearing a sweater. It is nice and cold here, so which is great to see. Yeah, as Joan said, I'm the National Director of Resident Programming for 5-Star Senior Living. And I came through senior living a little differently than a lot of people. I actually started in the tech side of things with It's Never Too Late as their Director of Implementation. And so really started out thinking outside of the box. And one of the things that I love hearing from our residents today is how important meaning and purpose is for them, whether that comes through the same routines that they follow, or by getting outside of the community or bringing the community inside their community. I think it's essential that we are providing meaning and purpose. And so the question always comes, well, that sounds great, but how do we operationalize that? How do we, still run a business with this model? And so one of the things that I would say is we have no choice. As tech makes it easier for residents to stay at home longer and longer, as an industry, as providers, we have to shift our thinking. At this point, the biggest thing our residents want is freedom of choice. It's essential. And so to get someone to move into a community where you are going to take away their freedom of choice is going to be extremely difficult. And so I love what Verna was talking about of the future being this citizenship. And I think for all of us, that should be the ultimate goal. And we saw it with Wynn when we saw one of her friends working part-time at the community, at the center. I think that's extremely important that we figure that out. The next step for many of us is just moving from that person-centered care to that person-directed care. So for a lot of our communities, that's where we are. Our current state is person-centered care. And I have a slide real quick just to kind of just show this, which is okay. It's better than where we have been, but really that next step is that person-directed care. And then beyond that will be that citizenship. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But the difference here is this resident being at the center of this, that all the decisions, all the arrows are pointing out, where the resident is the one making the decisions for themselves. They're making the decision about their health with the doctor. They're listening to the doctor as an expert. They are a resource for them, but ultimately it's the resident's choice on how they follow that. They're talking with their family, and their family is helping make some decisions, but ultimately the resident is the one in charge of that care, the care for themselves. For us, when we look at the community, I hear story after story after story saying, oh, the resident, we didn't, they weren't allowed to do this, they weren't allowed to do that, and they can't drink, or they can only have one drink, or they can't have a cigarette. These are the things that will really hurt our industry moving forward when we take away choice. And so we talk about what's best, what's the right thing, but ultimately our residents have the choice. And then for most of us on this call, we're really looking at the programs. How do we look at our programming and allow that citizenship or resident directed care model? And the key thing is we cannot just continue to say, this is what I think our residents want, or our residents talk to us once a month and then we're going to create a calendar from that in a resident council. We have to look at this and say, how do we get our residents actively involved in the planning and the execution of our program? So if we look at the next slide, one of the things I think is really important is if we follow what is happening in our lives. So as adults living outside of a community, in our own homes, what is happening in our life? And I kind of associated this with our own engagement. And if you look at this along the line, we all started out watching network TV. You had 3 or 4 channels. For many of you, if you're my age or older, I know for my parents, I was the remote control. I would have to walk up to the TV and manually change the channel for them. They would just tell me when to change it. All of it was same programs at the same time, with the goal is to interest the masses. You have 4 shows, and our goal is to get as many people to watch this as possible. We moved to cable TV, where we had more options available, and we had some interest-based programs. So things like ESPN and MTV and all of these things that allow you as an individual to have a little bit more say in your engagement. If we move forward, the last couple of years, Netflix, right? This is tons of options, so many different options that are based on our interests, and they're available more frequently, and they're not expecting as many people to watch it. It's a much smaller segment of people who are engaged by a program through that Netflix model, but you have access to it on demand. And then finally, if you have children like I do, they don't even really watch TV anymore. They watch YouTube or TikTok. And the cool thing about this, if you really dissect this and you look at it, is everyone can be a content creator. And you can either create your own or enjoy others. And so if I look at this and say, where are we in senior living? Some of our communities are at network TV. We offer 3 programs a day, 4 programs a day. They're the exact same thing. And we're trying to get as many people to show up. We don't care about purpose. We don't care about meaning. It's just about getting people there and saying, yep, we did 3 activities today. Some of us may be at that cable model. They might be, hey, we have a little more interest-based. We're not worried about getting as many people. We have more programming, but we're still kind of rigid. And some of us, and I hope a lot of us, are in that Netflix model, which is, hey, we're not expecting 40 people to show up. If I get 3 or 4, that's great. And if they really find purpose and meaning in it, that's great. That's where we want to be. And that really kind of becomes that almost resident directed model there. And then lastly, where I feel we need to go, and we'll talk about it for the remainder of my time, is that YouTube, TikTok, where our residents are the creator of the content that they are going to be part of, where we look at how do we have our residents leading programming, resident-led club model programs going, I have deep knowing of my residents, so I know their interests and backgrounds and passions. I connect people with similar interests, and we form clubs. And then we allow someone who has that passion, like a Verna, like a Win, like a Sandy, and say, would you lead this club? And we as professionals are there as a resource for them. So we advertise their club. I know other residents who might be interested. So I come and grab them and say, hey, Verna's starting this great club. I know you may have interest in this. Would you like to join? They meet every Tuesday at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m., whatever it may be. And so our role shifts from the entertainer to the connector of people. And so that's a huge shift that we need. And it gives our residents purpose and meaning. And so one of my favorite stories from one of our 5-star communities was in Yonkers. And we had a new resident move in who was a horticulturist. He worked at a botanical gardens, and he was really struggling to engage. And what the community did was they started talking to him and really getting to know him. And he said, I would love to help residents who have houseplants that may be dying. Can I do something like that? So they did a profile of him in the newsletter. And before you know it, he's doing house calls and he is checking on people's plants and educating them. And then that got so popular, they moved it to a weekly activity where people would bring their plants down to him and he would teach them about their house plants and proper care and all of these things. And he formed a club. Now, it didn't have 30 or 40, 50 people in it, but it had 10 people who had a passion for what he was sharing. And more importantly, it gave him purpose and an on-ramp for connecting with his fellow residents. And so as we really look in the future, our residents are central to creating the program. They are the YouTube, TikTok group that is making their own content. And we have to change. And I see that popped up from Laura Ellen. I love this because it's literally the next thing on my note is we have to change the way we view success. 30 or 40 people in a group where they're not engaged is not success. 4 or 5 people in a group who are passionate and can't wait to get to that next group meeting and they're connecting afterwards and they're walking down the halls talking about what they just did, that's success. It's not quantity, it is quality. And so how do we operationalize this quickly is I strongly believe we put in processes to deeply know our residents. That's 1. 2, all of our groups that we do go on our calendar. So that backbone of what we do, it's really hard to get away from that. Eventually we'll need to, but we still put groups on our calendar. So we redevelop our calendar to show the groups, and we coach. So as activity professionals, we coach residents on best practices on how to lead a group, consistency in time, consistency in location. We help advertise for them. Our goal is to get them the resources they need. And the biggest thing that comes out of this is from an operations standpoint, I can expand my hours of engagement beyond the hours of my activity professional. So groups can happen at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, even when we don't have team members there, if we have set up and established processes that allow that person to lead their group and have the resources they need to lead a group at 7 o'clock on a Saturday night. We don't have to be the center of everything. The residents become the center of that, and they have ownership in the process. And so huge things there's a lot of tech out there that can help you really operationalize, understand the deep knowing of your residents. We have to get away from paper and pen. And I think when tech companies, the more and more are looking at this, how do we create resident profiles and have searchable databases that allow us to find those connections for our residents? So utilize that tech, but also remember at the heart of it, it's about passion and what residents really want and allowing them to lead that for us. So, and I would like to, I'm going to ruin it at the end, but I also got through my entire presentation out using the C word, which I cannot wait till we get to go to conferences and we don't have to hear the word COVID anymore. So thank you guys so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Oh, Scott, as always, how enlightening, because we see the vision, but we're all looking for that practical, how do we make it happen? And I don't think, if you said this, I apologize, I must have zoned out, but one of the things you shared in our rehearsal was you talked about the value of it, for the activity professional, moving from you are the engagement program to you build the engagement program. And I love that quote of yours.
Yeah. It's, I always say, I talk to my activity professionals, if you walk out the door and the engagement stopped, you are the engagement. You did not build a program. And we have to get beyond that, where everyone looks at that activity professional to entertain them, and really you're building something that is bigger than yourself. That is a machine that works when you're not even in the community.
Absolutely. Well, I have to tell you the other thing I thought of when you were talking about the 7 p.m. program. I'm waiting for that community who has the night owls that have the 2 a.m. program.
Senior living, eventually, to me, I look at this and I hope this is our future, our goal, is one of the most fun times I ever had in my life is going to college and living in a dorm, because I was around people that were the same age as me with the same interests, who had some of the same goals. The next time I get to do that in my life is when I move into senior living. I want that same excitement and fun and chaos and pranks and all those things happening when I'm at that age that happened when I was 19 years old. So that's hoping. I got a little bit of time before I'm there, but I hope we can move the needle a little bit closer that direction.
There you go. So all of you out there who have to do with move-ins in your community, put Scott's name on your list of, uh-oh, this one's coming.
That's right.
And so now we've had a chance to hear from our 3 residents and from Scott, and we'd like to move on to just some discussion and questions and answers. And we have a couple prepared, but we absolutely would invite any questions that you have, because we prepared what we think you want to know, but we would like you to tell us what you really want to know. And we do have one question that popped up earlier. I saw Janet, our good friend Jenny Dill, put a question in there. She said, elders value being engaged with leadership. How do you foster this relationship within your community, the relationship between the residents, the elders that live there, and the formal leadership of the organization? So I don't know if someone would like to pop in and start that response.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about what we're doing and we're working towards. Again, it's a desired state. We're not there yet, and I don't want anyone to think that we are. But it is with a club model. I strongly believe that leadership should be leading clubs, and so it might be once a week, it might be once a month. In the new plan that I'm putting together, it's a once a month. Each member of our leadership team will be leading a club that so eventually we'll have one a week, but it's based on their interests. So it's like, hey, as your executive director, I'm passionate about this. If you'd love to join my club, we're meeting once a month at this time. And so it creates a little bit of that relationship. And then again, for anyone to join, to come into these clubs, again, time is super short, but to pop in and just be a part of that, and then always be asking questions. And I think those conversations, a lot of them happen really well over a meal. So encouraging our executive directors, our directors of nursing, all them to take a break and have a meal with a small group of residents and to listen and not to talk.
Food is a great catalyst, isn't it?
It is.
Verna, I think you had something you wanted to share here.
One thing to keep in mind is that when we think about community, is that we've been focused for years. It's almost as though there's been a wall up and we focus on our inner community. And that's very rich. But I also want to encourage, and so many communities do, this outside world, so that some of our residents sit on the neighborhood committee. And my folks, they have just been so amazing in encouraging me to move from basically local and inside the community to join the conversation nationally. So let's take down some of the walls and so we can integrate the outside and the inside communities in wonderful, wonderful ways.
How wonderful. And that it takes me to Wynn. Any thoughts on this?
No, I completely agree. I think I like the idea of serving our residents, serving on a community board, or helping volunteer or whatever they're able to do. I think this is very important. It strengthens the ties between the community and the residents. So.
Absolutely. And Sandra, I'm glad to see we got you. We don't have your picture still, but we've got you back. Any thoughts? I know you said when you spoke with us that you do have regular meetings with leadership. And it's hard without the picture, and so we may not really have you back.
We're okay.
Okay. So any thoughts, Sandra, on working together with leadership and what works well for you?
What works well for me is we have people here that encourage you to meet the new residents, for one thing. And of course, that was so horrible during COVID when you couldn't meet with any and show them around. And that's where I learned to go to exercise every day and so on. And of course, we didn't have any of that. And so it's like starting all over again and wondering what we can do to get together so that people feel that they are part of the program. And I did right away because of the activities at the time. So I think that's one thing that, but we're doing better, but it's a slow process. And I guess we have to get used to that, where before it was boom, boom, boom. You know, we could do this, that, and the other thing. And there was always entertainment. We had lots of music programs come in. And of course, that's gone. Just things that we had always been able to take part in. Are slowly coming back, but it takes a long time.
Absolutely. Well, and as things come back, I think that's what makes this question such a critical question.
Right.
And this whole topic so critical is, as things come back, this is our opportunity to hear that voice, to make sure we take the time while things have slowed down a little bit,
Right.
although I'm sure that doesn't feel that way to providers. And so we'll move on. And so I'm going to take us to another question that our team thought was an important question to ask. And that was, we talked about, as we look at listening to the resident voice, I think most of us have been in a situation where the request has been something that maybe was a little bit risky. And, we know as an industry, we tend to be relatively risk adverse. And so as we're looking to the resident voice, how do we balance that safety and well-being? How do we honor Pioneers Network's value, which is one of my favorites, which is risk-taking is a natural part of life. So I know, Verna, you said you had some thoughts on that one, maybe a little bit a counterpoint even.
I forgot what I said formerly, but
well, you told me you were going to defend safety. You said you were going to defend safety.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I played devil's advocate a little bit because everybody was going on and on about isolation and loneliness and all of that, and being too rigid withdrawals and stuff. And I said, hey, we were scared. People were dying. And so we supported our director and team. They worked very, very hard. And yes, it was difficult, but a lot of those rules had to happen. And we felt safer. So that's my devil advocate position. But I have to say, for those of us who are using technology and so on, with the various aids, life just went on. We had a full day. There wasn't any loneliness or isolation. We connected inside the community through technology and outside into the community. So that is a really critical piece.
And Scott or Wynn, any thoughts?
Yes, I wanted to say that our staff was absolutely wonderful while we were incarcerated. We had our 3 meals, of course, served to us, and we were eating alone, which is not much fun. But then they arranged to come 2 other times during the day to serve snacks, candy bars or ice cream or whatever, they thought would be a little lift. And we have happy hour every other week. And so they even had a happy hour via a cart that they wheeled around once during COVID. And that was so much fun. It just added to the day.
Absolutely. I think, Wynn, what you shared reminds all of those out there that are listening, our attendees here, that even as you struggled through the last 18 months, you have been doing things that have been making a difference for the residents in your communities. And I think that's been reflected in Wynn and Verna and Sandra's, all their comments. So you should be very proud of that, and good to hear from residents that it's made a difference.
It did.
Scott, you had a thought?
Yeah, so and I'm stealing this from one of my mentors when I was with Thrive Senior Living. Her name's Tammy Marshall, and so she used to always say that safety is our 3rd filter, right? Our first filter is, what does the resident want? What is their goal? What do they want to do? Our second filter is, what are the obstacles that create this not being safe? So what are the obstacles in our way? And our third filter is safety. And so as long as we're educating people on what the risks are and we're doing it as safely as possible, it ultimately is up to the resident as a adult to make those decisions for them. Our job is to give them the education and to help remove as many of the obstacles or roadblocks there are. But safety third mentality.
What a great, I love those 3 steps. Those are wonderful. Scott, if you could type those in the chat. I was going to, but I wasn't fast enough. I think our listeners would appreciate having that as well. And I'm going to move on to another question that as we talked, as we were preparing for this session, you can't talk about anything right now without being aware of and cognizant to the challenges of the workforce. And, we're needing people in the workforce, but we need the right people in the workforce. And this approach to engagement is a shift. It's a shift in thinking for a lot of people. It's no longer the activities belong to the activity department, even though the regs told us that many, many years ago. We still kind of have that mentality in way too many organizations. So we need to shift that thinking. And that means as we hire new people, we're looking for something different. And so that was a question that this group kind of bantered around a little bit. When you're hiring people, what are you looking for? What are those skill sets needed in order to be able to support this perspective, this leadership coming from the residents? I see shaking heads. Now we need somebody.
We have such a great collaborative relationship with, they think of residents as colleagues, and that is a shift. It's a very egalitarian shift. And, but it's fun. We have fun together, bouncing off ideas and so on. And once that shift happens and people become comfortable with it, I think it's probably a whole lot more fun than it was before. So,
yeah, and I would add, for me, I'm looking for somebody who knows how to build relationships inside the community and outside of the community. Somebody that can get to know residents one-on-one and understand who they are and what motivates them, and really is passionate about that, but also is building relationships outside of the community so that our residents have opportunities, whether that is volunteering outside of the community, having somebody come into the community. How do we really create someone who is a connector, is what I really am looking for. Not somebody who has a ton of industry experience at all times. I want someone thinking a little bit differently. And then again, we're going to have to shift at some point to a more tech, a tech driven, right? There's a lot of data that we don't get because we don't have people that are entering that or want to do that. And there's a lot of stuff out there that we're just not utilizing because we don't have the hardware or we don't have the knowledge in the community on how to use that. So, but ultimately for me, number one is a connector of people, someone who can build relationships.
I think that's a critical piece. Wynn, any thoughts?
No, I totally agree with Scott.
Okay. And Sandy we've lost Sandy right now, but she had shared with us earlier, so I'll share with you. Her comment was, we need people who are interested in people. You need to be a people person.
Right.
It was a great comment. And so we have another question. This one is for Myrna and Wynn. Martha and a couple other people have chimed in, would like to know, what are your favorite activities or clubs?
Myrna?
I was going to shift it to you, and I think for a minute.
All right. Well, I'm on the hospitality committee, which is with the buddy system for new members here, new residents. We didn't have one, and I thought we should. So I asked permission to begin a buddies club. So when somebody moves in new, and they have lots of questions, they don't know where the dining room is and things like that, we're with them for a couple of days until they're more comfortable being on their own. And they have our phone number and can call or visit if they have any questions. And that was very important. And what else do I do? We have a librarian come in normally from the public library once a month and review 3 new books. And that's always fun to go to. We have a lot of operas and musical events, which are my favorite things to go. So there's too much to do sometimes.
What a wonderful problem. How about you, Myrna? Have you had a chance to think about that one?
My role has really shifted, and I think that's an okay thing, that we have transitions in our lives. Originally, in the first few years, I was very involved in teaching and programming and all of that sort of thing, deeply involved. And then in the last couple of years, my role has changed to more of the bridge or the connector with the aging community and folks like the participants right at this moment, and it's sharing with them the national conversation and what are the issues and so on and so forth. So yeah, so I'm in a shift situation. And so I can go back and talk to my director and some of the staff, but the team members, but also sit down with some of our leadership among the residents and have a discussion about what's going on out in the world.
And I think, Berna, what you talk about really reinforces what we, one of the domains of well-being is growth. And, we always ask the question, when do you stop growing? And the answer is never. And you have certainly demonstrated that in your journey. As you come in, Berna's going to be speaking at Leading Age National. So what an advocate, what a wonderful opportunity for residents to be places and really have their voice heard. We did have another couple of questions that have come through. I'm gonna share one. Bonnie made a comment. It's a wonderful comment. She said host change has started by changing the title to Community Life Director to get away from the idea that they are there to entertain, but that they are there to build community. And we truly believe that words are so critical, the language that we use. And so that's a wonderful place to shift. So Bonnie, thank you for sharing that with us. And Annie asked a question that kind of went back to an earlier discussion question we had, but it's a great one. How do you find, when we're looking for those staff, we know what we want to interview when we hire, but what about the staff that are already in your community, that are already a part of your team, even if they aren't sure that they can share their passion outside of their department? How do we bring them on board? How can we get them engaged in this new way of being?
For me, a lot of it has to do with a lot of people. It's a philosophical change that, you're not the one up front always talking, right? You're not the one leading all the time, and really saying, what are your passions? What are you interested in? And how can you bring that to our team and connect with residents who have a similar passion? There's always a place for large group programming. And I'm not saying there's not. I look at my own life. There's times when I do things in a large group. But those are special things. It's not a daily thing that I'm hanging out with a group of 30 or 40. So there needs to be people who are, connectors, who are going to work in small groups. I think it's really essential that we maintain the one-on-one connection between, just for those residents who are self-isolating. Even with a club model, you're going to get people who self-isolate a little bit. So some of those team members who maybe don't want to be in front of that large group, having them do one-on-ones. I literally have our team put one-on-ones on their calendar as a scheduled activity, because we live by our calendars, unfortunately. So one-on-ones are on there. So it's something for them to be able to do that way as well. The hardest thing is if you don't have the right person in these seats, it can be a big challenge for your entire community. I talk to our EDs all the time about, this is not a role. An activity professional is not a role for someone to keep that seat warm. It can really quickly just really hurt your overall community feel. And you won't even realize it, but all of a sudden the whole community feels different if the wrong person's in that seat. So that selection process of finding your activity professional should be one that you take very, very seriously if you're an executive director.
I think you're so right, Scott. And I like that you remind us too, as you talk, that as we move to the new, keep some of the familiar there so that people are not, we don't need that shock of all of a sudden tomorrow is a totally different world. Give people a chance to transition and take their time and help them grow. And that kind of goes along with having them involved in the change. I don't do to you, I do with you. That applies both as we work with residents and as we work with staff. So it's such a very important thing. Now, we did have one last question, but I'm going to tell you we're not going to answer it on this panel, because we have a whole panel that's going to talk about it, and we couldn't do it justice in 2 minutes anyway. We had a question about a comment and a question from Susan. She's found that it's not so much the staff attitudes or wishes that they need to change from institutional to resident directed. It's the activity budget. That $50 a month doesn't go very far. so how do you change that? How do you change that thought process? And this is where you're going to get to meet Wynn's leader, because in our third session today, that's exactly the kind of thing that our panelists are going to be talking about. So hang tight. That is coming. So we have just a couple minutes left. So I'm going to ask Scott and Wynn and Verna, if any of you have just a closing pearl of wisdom that you would like to share with our attendees as we close our session. So Scott, we'll let the gentleman go first.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Ultimately, to me, it's just know your residents at such a deep level. Have conversations with them. Share about your own life. We sometimes make that relationship a one-way thing. It should be a friendship that goes both ways. And so share with your residents, know your residents, and we talked about the budget, that advocate. Your goal is to advocate for residents, for resident programming, for all of that. You are the one closest to the work. And so you should be the one fighting the hardest for that engagement for our residents.
Wonderful message. Thank you. Wynn or Verna?
I try to be a go-between between the staff, the administration, and the residents. I'm sort of a gadfly or something. People don't want to speak up. So they'll say, oh, you do it. So I find myself carrying messages and suggestions and complaints sometimes. But I feel there's got to be somebody among the residents who's willing to do this and not do it in a way that's biased, or, I don't throw my opinion in, I just carry the message. But I think that's very important.
Wonderful message. Thank you, Wynn. Verna?
Just a quick, cute little example of collaboration, resident-directed art gallery exhibits that we have often. And one of our maintenance men really was getting into it. He was really enjoying the gallery. And one day he was painting and he looked down and realized that he was creating on the little canvas that catches the paint, these wonderful abstracts. So he cut them out and framed them and said, can I be part of your gallery? And everybody they were beautiful. And, the excitement and the joy and that sharing and exchange was just a wonderful thing.
What a great story, and reminds us that this is about all of us. Thank you, Verna and Wynn and Scott and Sandy. And just in closing, thank you, Jed, out there, for your comment about menu of activities. If you didn't see that in the chat,
Yeah,
what a cool idea. Instead of an activity calendar, an activity menu. And I just will close with just one thing, going back to something that was shared by Peter Illig before we even started our session, as he was talking about the regulations. The regulations tell us we should look for the highest practicable well-being for residents living in our communities. And practicable is not about what is convenient, it is about what is possible. And thank you for sharing today, this morning, the possibilities and the vision for finding those possibilities as we move forward. It's been a pleasure being a part of this panel with all of you. And I look forward to learning more from you and to moving on to more sessions today. So thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.